welcome to the Bakersfield Symphony. My name is Kendra Green. I'm the Director of Education Engagement with the Bakersfield Symphony, and I'll be your host for this video. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and thank the sponsors and donors whose generous gifts make the Bakersfield Symphony education programs possible. This season, our premier education sponsors are Kern Family Health Systems, Kern County Superintendent of Schools, Dignity Health, the Wonderful Company Foundation, and the Scripps Howard Foundation. Today we'll be taking a look at the composers and music being performed in our upcoming May concert. We'll start with American composer Florence Price and the Andante Moderato from her string quartet in G major. Florence Price was an African-American musician and composer who is most well known for being the first African-American woman whose work was performed by a major symphony orchestra. Price began her musical journey in her home of Little Rock, Arkansas, encouraged by her mother, who was a music teacher. At just 4 years old, she was already playing piano and beginning to compose. She graduated high school at 14 and went on to graduate from the New England Conservatory of Music with 2 degrees, one in piano teaching and the other in organ performance. She moved to Chicago to escape the often violent racism of the South, and it was there that her symphony in E minor was performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. For most composers, this would have been the start of an illustrious career, but she was a woman, and she was African American, and based on one or both of these factors, and despite her obvious success in Chicago, many institutions dismissed her requests to perform her work. We are doing our part today to pay homage to her incredible talent by performing the second movement of her string quartet in G major, marked as Andante Moderato. For our performance, a small string orchestra will play the piece rather than a string quartet. The movement begins with a moving, song-like melody. The middle section of the piece is more lively. Watch and listen for pizzicato, which is when the string instruments play by plucking the strings instead of using their bows. The piece ends with the same melody that opened the movement. This structure, a slower melody, and then a faster section, and then the same slower melody repeated at the end, is called ternary form, or ABA form, with A representing the slower melody and B representing the more lively middle section. The other piece being presented on our concert is Serenade No. 10, also known as the Gran Partita, by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Mozart was an incredible musician whose musical career began at an extremely early age. Like Florence Price, young Mozart was playing piano and composing by the tender age of 4. But his father decided to capitalize on Mozart's gifts and parade him around Europe, performing for nobility and royalty, and making a sizable amount of money in the process. To make a long story short, Mozart became one of the most well-known musicians of all time. If you'd like to learn more about his life and work, check out our Mozart video. You can find the link in the description below this video. Mozart's Serenade No. 10, or the Gran Partita, stands out among music from the classical period because it was one of the few pieces written entirely for wind instruments. The Gran Partita is played by oboes, bassoons, clarinets, basset horns, which are old clarinet-like instruments that aren't really used anymore, so we used regular clarinets instead, French horns, and a string bass. Wind instruments during the classical period were much less refined than string instruments were, and to put it bluntly, often played out of tune and just didn't sound very good. Perhaps Mozart knew some particularly talented wind musicians, or perhaps he could see the potential of the instruments. In either case, he wrote them music worthy of the very best. Another reason this piece is a standout among music at the time is that serenades were usually written as background music, and as such were often a little bland. It wasn't music that people were actively listening to. It was background music during a party or dinner or event. It was used to set the mood and to relieve guests of awkward silences. Symphonies and concertos, those were the types of music written for the concert hall, written to be exciting and engaging for audiences who were there to do one thing: enjoy live music. Well, Mozart wrote this piece like a symphony. It's got a little bit of everything. It's soulful and moving, it's playful and quirky, it's fast and agitated. The different movements keep you on your toes. You never know what's coming next. Just as Mozart seemed to realize the potential of future wind instruments, he seemed to realize that this piece would not always be relegated to the background of a party and would someday have its day in the spotlight. The Gran Partita has 8 movements. As I said before, it's always changing and keeps you on your toes. There are some specific things I'd like you to listen for. Think of it as sort of a musical scavenger hunt. First, listen for conversations between instruments. One instrument will take turns playing with another, as though they're having a conversation. This happens quite a bit throughout the piece, sometimes between 2 of the clarinets, sometimes between the clarinet and oboe, sometimes between the oboe and bassoon. See if you can notice when it's happening. Second, in most cases, smaller, higher-pitched instruments, like clarinet and oboe, have faster, more intricate parts than larger, lower-pitched instruments, like the bassoon. Well, there's one movement where the bassoons have their moment in the spotlight, and they take off playing 16th notes while all the other instruments mosey along on a slower melody. It's my favorite part of the piece. See if you can catch it when it happens. Finally, I want you to see if you can guess when the final movement starts. The last movement is fast. Pay attention to how each movement starts and see if you can identify the final movement when it arrives. I hope you enjoyed learning about Florence Price, Mozart, and their music, and I hope you enjoy the Bakersfield Symphony performance of their works.